Results tonight at 8 on C-SPAN 2. The U.S. House coming in next, gaveling in to take up work in repealing part of the health care law known as the Class Act. It provides long-term health care services. Live House coverage here on C-SPAN.
That at any time after the adoption of this resolution, the Speaker may, pursuant to Clause 2B of Rule 18, declare the House resolved into the Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union for consideration of the bill, H.R. 1173, to repeal the class program. The first reading of the bill shall be dispensed with. All points of order against consideration of the bill are waived. General debate shall be confined to the bill and shall not exceed 1 hour, with 40 minutes equally divided and controlled by the Chair and Ranking Minority Member of the Committee on Energy and Commerce, and 20 minutes equally divided and controlled by the Chair and Ranking Minority Member of the Committee on Ways and Means. After general debate, the bill shall be considered for amendment under the 5-minute rule for a period not to exceed 3 hours. It shall be in order to consider as an original bill for the purpose of amendment under the 5-minute rule, the amendment in the nature of a substitute recommended by the Committee on Energy and Commerce now printed in the bill. The committee amendment in the nature of a substitute shall be considered as read. All points of order against the committee amendment in the nature of a substitute are waived. No amendment to the committee amendment in the nature of a substitute shall be in order, except those received for printing in the portion of the congressional record designated for that purpose in Clause 8 of Rule 18 in a daily issue dated January 31st, 2012, or earlier, and accept pro forma amendments for the purpose of debate. Each amendment so received may be offered only by the member who caused it to be printed or a designee and shall be considered as read if printed. At the conclusion of consideration of the bill for amendment, the committee shall rise and report the bill to the House with such amendments as may have been adopted. Any member may demand a separate vote in the House on any amendment adopted in the Committee of the Whole to the bill or to the committee amendment in the nature of a substitute. The previous question shall be considered as ordered on the bill, and amendments thereto to final passage without intervening motion except one motion to recommit with or without instructions.
The gentleman from Texas, Mr. Sessions, is recognized for 1 hour.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. For the purpose of debate only, I yield the customary 30 minutes to my friend, the gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. McGovern, for such time as he may choose, and I yield myself such time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
During consideration of this resolution, all time is yielded for the purpose of debate only. Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks.
Without objection.
House Resolution 522 provides a modified open rule for consideration of H.R. 1173. This rule allows for any amendment pre-filed in the congressional record which complies with the rules of the House to be made in order. That's pretty simple. Mr. Speaker, I rise today in support of this rule and the underlying bill, H.R. 1173, Fiscal Responsibility and Retirement Security Act of 2011, which was introduced on March the 17th, 2011, by the gentleman, my dear friend from Louisiana, Congressman Charles Boustany, and was reported by the Committee on Energy and Commerce by a vote of 33 to 17 on November the 29th, 2011. Additionally, the bill was reported by the Committee on Ways and Means on January 18th, 2012 by a vote of 23 to 13. This legislation has been through regular order. Members from both sides of the aisle on several committees have had the opportunities to submit perfecting ideas, and those amendments have been considered. With the modified open process brought forward by the Rules Committee, every pre-printed amendment will be given full and fair consideration by this body. Mr. Speaker, the Community Living Assistance Services and Supports Act, or known as the CLASS Act, was a budgetary gimmick introduced by congressional Democrats in the Obamacare bill to fit a 10-year budget score, not providing reliable insurance coverage. And that is why we are here today. Built on an unstable foundation, this long-term health insurance system was broken from its inception, and yet was used to sell the Obamacare to those who did not fully comprehend its future implications. Let's review the facts of this case. The Class Act establishes a long-term health coverage program that would be operated by the federal government. The program is a guaranteed issue, meaning no one can be turned away. The program provides subsidized premiums to those under the age of 22 and to those below the poverty line. Finally, it can use no government funding. Isn't that a recipe for failure? I'm not sure how else you would design the program. Giving reduced premiums to some and mandatory coverage for all necessarily drives up the monthly premium. The Department of Health and Human Services indicated that the plans as designed would cost $235 and $391 a month and could rise as much as $3,000 a month for those in the program. Anyone who is healthy and above the poverty line would most certainly turn to the private sector, leaving the program woefully underfunded. These are the facts. The program is not viable and non-sustainable. Secretary Sebelius, Secretary of Health and Human Services, finally agreed on October 14th, saying, and I quote, "I do not see a viable path forward at this time," end of quote, in reference to the program. It makes you wonder what other sections of Obamacare might not be physically sound, given a closer review also. Oh, by the way, this Republican Congress is doing that right now, in committee, under regular order. Apparently, however, we had to pass the bill to find out about the class program and what was in it and how it might work. Mr. Speaker, we are not solving the problem by creating programs that are unsustainable. We continue to double down, taking Medicare and Medicaid relentlessly. We are taking and taxing them to where they cannot pay for themselves. President Obama and congressional Democrats actually cut $500 billion in Medicare in order to fund the Class Act and flawed programs like it in the Obamacare package. Republicans, the majority Republicans in this House, are committed to protecting Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security for future generations, not passing empty promises, those that cannot sustain themselves and those that would be headed for failure from the inception. I believe we are abandoning the core mission of entitlement programs, which was meant to bring necessary to coverage to those who cannot provide for themselves. Mr. Speaker, I, like many Americans, can speak from a personal basis about what a disappointment this is, not just the Obamacare bill, but the provisions laid out in that. You see, I'm not unlike many Americans, I have a disabled son at home. I have an 18-year-old Down syndrome young man who I and Alex would count on the government, perhaps at some point, to be able to do its real responsibility. And I believe government should have a mission statement, and the government should have a role in lives of Americans, but it should be one which is very narrow and well understood. I understand and believe that we should have a government that does help people who need help, that we do have a government that can give assistance. However, I believe that able-bodied people should not be included in these programs. I believe that the people who should be a part of this government assistance should be those that have an intellectual or physical disability. They should be those who are seniors, our parents, who because of their age and their service to this great country, they have earned this and should be given that help. And lastly, those who are poor, those, in other words, at or below the poverty line. I believe that what this bill has done and the philosophy of the Democratic Party, including this president, it's one that will diminish the real role that government should be providing. Because, in fact, it has gone so far out of its intended purpose or its ability to sustain what it should be doing, to where in fact it will be a sham system and not able to help those that it should be intended to help in the first place. I've seen this many times. I've seen it in professional sports where, as an analogy, people will buy a season ticket and get a parking pass with it. And there are sometimes 10 or 15,000 people that buy season tickets for 4,000 parking places. In other words, there may be 10,000 people that have the right to come to that parking place, but there's only room for a few. Mr. Speaker, our government and the leaders of this government, including Secretary Sebelius, I believe recognize the limitations and the failures of this piece of legislation. Just this one piece of legislation alone is what we are trying to highlight as Republicans today, and Dr. Boustany is right in bringing it to us. We should not be creating a system that would be outside the scope of what the government should actually be doing to help those who cannot help themselves or who deserve that opportunity to have help. And by creating a larger-than-life, in other words, a scenario which cannot be sustainable, they've in fact put the underpinnings of something that could be good at risk, selling too many parking places for the ones that need to exist. The parking places that need to exist need to be on a one-on-one basis for the people who need them the most. And that is what the government should be doing and doing well, not going outside of its mandate and not promising something that is non-sustainable and that they cannot deliver on. Mr. Speaker, I would submit and suggest that some Democrats will rise today to defend this bill, the Class Act, and they would defend what they thought it was about. But in fact, the facts of the case are now known and well understood, that even the President and his administration are walking away from this piece part of the bill. The program is fatally flawed, and a full repeal is the only realistic way we should approach this. So, now's the time to be serious with the American people. Now's the time when we need to say that should not have been a part of what this health care bill was about. It will surely not deliver what was sold that it was intended to do, and before we engage in that, we ought to be realistic and honest about what this is doing. Now is time to be serious with the American people about expectations from the federal government as related to this program. House Republicans are committed to providing affordable, patient-driven solutions to the problems facing our health care systems today. And we recognize in going through the bill that this stands out as a prime example of what is broken about the legislation that is law today. So, we are here today forthrightly through regular order to talk in a polite and sensible way about how we should handle what we now know, what we should have known then, but failed to do. Not reading the bill is just another example of the flawed process that we were going through. I urge all my colleagues to vote for this modified open rule that allows consideration of all pre-printed amendments that comply with House rules of the House, and vote for the underlying bill. I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Texas reserves his time. The gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. Govern, is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank the gentleman from Texas, my friend Mr. Sessions, for yielding me the customary 30 minutes. And I ask unanimous consent to revise and extend my remarks, and I yield myself such time as I may consume.
Without objection. The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. First of all, Mr. Speaker, I would urge my colleagues to vote no on this rule. One is, as was pointed out, this is not truly an open rule. There is a pre-printing requirement, but there is also a cap, a time limit of 3 hours on the total debate for this bill. So if members have an idea about an amendment they want to offer and it bumps up against the 3-hour time limit, they're out of luck. And I would remind my colleagues that this is an important issue. This is about long-term care, health care, mostly for our senior citizens. This is an important subject. We should be talking about this. We should be deliberating on this. And it deserves the necessary time to do this issue justice. And I guess I shouldn't be surprised because, you know, we can't get this leadership to bring up not only legitimate health care bills to help improve the quality of health care for our citizens, but we can't get them to bring up jobs bills. We can't seem to get this leadership to bring up anything of any consequence or any significance to the American people or anything that will improve the quality of life for the citizens of this country. And, Mr. Speaker, my friends on the other side of the aisle want to portray this as a very simple debate. They want everyone to think that this bill, this is a bill that just ends, as they put it, a problematic or a failed program, a bill that says we're going to run our government more effectively and more efficiently, a bill that says that we're going to get health care right for the American people. But, Mr. Speaker, nothing, absolutely nothing, could be further from the truth. And let me be clear. This bill is just one more example of how the Republican majority in this House stands with big insurance instead of the American people. It's another example of how Republicans want to rig the health care system so insurance companies can continue to discriminate based on pre-existing conditions and can continue to reap big profits at the expense of our families. Democrats stand for improving access to the best health care system in the world. We want Americans to be able to take care of themselves and to plan for long-term care should they need it. The debate in the Rules Committee last week was a telling example of how my friends on the other side of the aisle view this critical health care issue. During that debate, one of our colleagues, Republican colleagues in the Rules Committee, compared long-term care planning to owning a swimming pool, a luxury, saying that since the government shouldn't build a swimming pool for everyone in the country, that we should be providing long-term care advice or help with long-term care planning for the American people. Mr. Speaker, this is where the discourse on health care has landed. We talk about how to lower costs and to increase access to health care, and my Republican friends talk about swimming pools. They are in over their heads, which is why their poll numbers are sinking to the bottom. This bill may appear to be fairly simple, but it will have a devastating impact on Americans as they plan for the future. H.R. 1173, the so-called Fiscal Responsibility and Retirement Security Act, would repeal the Class Act and defund the National Clearinghouse for Long-Term Care Information. The Class Act is a national voluntary insurance program for purchasing long-term or disabled care for things like nursing home fees. Let me repeat that. It's a voluntary program. There's no mandate, no requirement, no obligation for anyone to participate. This bill also converts mandatory funding for the National Clearinghouse for Long-Term Care Information into discretionary funding. While they say that this saves $9 million, the truth is Americans will lose access to critical information that can help them decide what kind of long-term care coverage they may or may not want, they may not need as they grow older. We need to figure out how to best address the cost and availability of long-term care in the United States. And the reality is that voting for this bill is the same as putting your fingers in your ears or covering your eyes. Surely you may not want to be able to hear or see what is bothering you, but it doesn't mean that these problems go away. So why are we doing this today? Why are we repealing this without any replacement, without any thought given to how we might help the American people? Well, if you listen to the Republican rhetoric, you'd think that some unnamed and unseen person is going to send you off to a dark room in an isolated nursing home and you have no choice where to spend your golden years. That is, of course, if you listen to their ridiculous rhetoric. It's true that the Obama administration has suspended enactment of the Class Act. They have done so after carefully assessing how they could implement a long-term, financially stable class program. Unfortunately, they do not see a way forward at this particular point. But that doesn't mean we should just give up, throw up our hands and walk away. While the Class Act is a sound premise, it clearly needs more work if it's going to be a viable program. The problem with H.R. 1173 is that it repeals the Class Act. We need to fix the Class Act, not to destroy it. We need to engage on how to solve this problem, not to walk away from it, not to turn it into yet another piece of campaign rhetoric. But that's not how the Republicans operate in this House. Their goal, it appears, is to tear down the health care system and prevent people from getting adequate health care. How else can you explain their actions to repeal the Affordable Care Act and to end Medicare? Mr. Speaker, the Republicans began the 112th Congress with an effort to, quote, repeal and replace, end quote, the Affordable Care Act. Well, the House voted to repeal the new health care law, but we still haven't seen their replacement. They voted for repeal without replacement. And I should also point out to my colleague from Texas, it wasn't brought up under regular order. The repeal was brought up under a closed rule. But that's not unique in this House either. The Republicans in control of the House of Representatives have found the time for bills on abortion and guns, bills to defund Planned Parenthood and National Public Radio, and bills reaffirming our national motto, as if our national motto needs reaffirming. But when it comes to improving the quality of health care for the American people, my friends on the other side of the aisle are strangely silent. As we near the second anniversary of the enactment of the Affordable Care Act, it's important to look at the success of this law and explain why repeal, as they have advocated, would cause real harm to the American people. We know for a fact that the Affordable Care Act is lowering costs and expanding coverage for millions of Americans. The truth is crystal clear. 2.5 million young adults gained health insurance. 2.5 million young Americans gained health insurance. More than 40,000 Americans with pre-existing medical conditions gained affordable health care coverage. 350 new community health centers were built, and nearly 19,000 new jobs were created last year alone. Americans are benefiting from greater protections from unreasonable private insurance premium hikes. More than 2 million senior citizens saved more than $1.2 billion on prescription drugs in 2011. Again, let me repeat that. More than 2 million senior citizens saved more than $1.2 billion of prescription drugs in 2011. They want to repeal the bill, that the Affordable Health Insurance Bill, which closes the donut hole, and all of a sudden senior citizens will see a tax hike the next time they look at their medical, their prescription costs. Seniors in Medicare Advantage plans saw their monthly premiums decrease 14% from 2010 to 2011. Millions of women, seniors, and people with disabilities access preventative services. The Department of Health and Human Services and Department of Justice stopped $3 billion in fraudulent claims in 2011. And we also know that the quality of care is improving because of the Affordable Care Act. I'm talking about an expanded workforce, including primary care workers, better coordinated care for Medicare patients, and improvements in preventable hospital care and readmission conditions, just to name a few. In fact, the entire debate within the healthcare community is changing on how we better can keep our citizens well. And finally, we know that the healthcare industry is hiring more workers because of the Affordable Care Act. In fact, 514,900 new healthcare jobs have been created since the Affordable Care Act was enacted almost 2 years ago. Clearly, Mr. Speaker, the Affordable Care Act is working, and benefits will continue to grow as we move towards full implementation by 2016. But by opposing the Affordable Care Act, by pursuing repeal of the bill, the Republicans have made it clear that they are against protections for people with pre-existing conditions, that they are against expanding coverage for 2.5 million young adults who can't get health care on their own, that they are against the new community health centers, that they are against the new jobs created by the Affordable Health Care Act. And with this bill today, they are announcing that they are against planning for long-term care. This makes no sense, Mr. Speaker. Americans need to think about long-term care. They need planning options for the future. Currently, 10 million Americans need long-term care, and 5 million more will need long-term care over the next decade. Yet only 8% of Americans currently buy private long-term care insurance. Instead of forcing people to migrate towards Medicaid, the only other long-term care option available, we should be providing Americans with the tools they need to plan for the future. That's what the intention of the Class Act and the purpose of the National Clearinghouse for Long-Term Care Information was all about. Now, I know my friends will say, well, just trust us. We're going to come up with something down the road. Wouldn't it have been refreshing, in the spirit of bipartisanship, if we had come up with something before they chose to just outrightly repeal this provision? Maybe this would have been an opportunity for people to come together. But no, we're told we're repealing it. You know, that fits in with our campaign rhetoric for 2012. We're going to repeal it. And, you know, the American people just trust us. Take 2 tax breaks, call me in the morning. That's all you need to worry about. The American people expect Congress to work on American people expect Congress to work each and every day to make this country better. Like Social Security and Medicare before it, the Affordable Care Act is an example of responsible legislating that is improving people's lives. It is not perfect. We need to build on it. We're going to need to make corrections. But there's not a piece of legislation that we've ever passed in any Congress that hasn't need to be corrected and adjusted and tweaked as time has gone on. But it is an important step in the right direction. And notwithstanding the rhetoric on the other side of the aisle, it has made a real difference in the lives of many millions of Americans who otherwise wouldn't have access to health care. We must not and we will not let the Republicans drag us down with them on this issue. Vote no on this rule and no on the underlying bill. I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Massachusetts reserves his time. The gentleman from Texas, Mr. Sessions, is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, thank you very much, and I appreciate, I find it very interesting, my friend's arguments. First of all, the health care bill hadn't even kicked in, so millions of people have not gotten the advantages of this bill yet. I would suggest to you, I would yield to the gentleman.
I mean, if I'm not mistaken, the ban on the allowance to let families keep their kids on their health insurance until they're 26 years old has kicked in.
And that was a bipartisan agreement.
No, under your bill, your repeal bill, that would go away. That was part of the Affordable Care Act. That's one of the many things that's kicked in.
Reclaim my time. Mr. Speaker, at the time the bill was passed, we agreed to a number of things that we did think were good ideas. That was a good idea. The $500 billion of cuts in Medicare that Republicans talked about, we did not set that up for this election. They did that 2 years ago. That's one of the reasons why the American people, 50+% of the American people, another reason why they do not like this bill. But to suggest that all the advantages that are occurring as a result of this bill would be a misnomer. As a matter of fact, it's causing almost 80% of small business owners not to make decisions about hiring people for the future, and it's causing intense financial problems, not only upon small businesses but upon other businesses who don't hire people. It's causing a substantial problem on the amount of money that we are spending by this government right now. Oh, by the way, that legislation also said in certain pieces of it that it's not for review by judicial or congressional oversight, that whatever these panels do is a decision that they would make. It is very restrictive. It is a government-run system, and it is causing enormous financial distress to this country. So I appreciate the gentleman trying to take all the high attributes for it. It's a system that Republicans will vote to repeal, and we will replace that with a system that is market-based and that works. Lastly, I would say the gentleman, he talked about how cost-effective it is. Insurance rates are raising 30% this year alone for people in the private sector, and that's non-sustainable. Mr. Speaker, today we, however, are talking about a larger issue, and that is a piece part of that bill, the Class Act. And I'm very pleased today to have a gentleman who's a great member of our conference, a physician by trade, of enormous consequence, that we have a person that understands why this piece of the bill in particular today must be repealed. And I'm delighted to have the original sponsor of the bill, the gentleman, Mr. Boustany, and I would yield 5 minutes to him at this time.
Gentleman from Louisiana, Mr. Boustany, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank my friend from Texas for yielding some time to me on this important debate. As a physician, I know firsthand about the needs out there with regard to long-term care. I've treated hundreds of patients who've needed it. This is a very important problem. It's an acute problem, and it's something that this Congress has to take seriously. I also have a personal stake in this. I lost my father 3 years ago, and he did not have a long-term care policy, and we had to deal with it. And we dealt with it. We were fortunate. As a family, we came together, and we were able to take care of his needs. Many families can't. That's why this Congress has to get serious about dealing with this problem. Now, our friends on the other side of the aisle had the last Congress, had two Congresses before, or the two Congresses to try to deal with this. And they proposed a health care bill. Yet there was no debate on any other alternatives. This was a one-size-fits-all. This particular program wasn't even vetted in the House committees, and yet it was added into the bill as a budget gimmick. That's not serious legislation, and that's not doing justice to the American people who are faced with these problems every single day. Washington should have learned from this mistake. And there are three basic lessons that we can learn from this class program that was added into Obamacare. This class program, a failed program, an unsustainable program by the administration's own admission. First, the first lesson, don't ignore reality. Democrat leaders ignored actuarial experts' warnings when they used the class program as a budget gimmick in Obamacare. President Obama cannot create a self-funded, sustainable program that prohibits underwriting unless he intends to force healthy Americans to participate. Most enrollees will be high risk, causing premiums to skyrocket, making class less appealing to healthy Americans. So the first lesson, don't ignore reality. Second lesson, simple, don't break the law. The administration planned to break the law by excluding Americans made eligible by the statute. And when Congressional Research Services attorneys warned of lawsuits, I sent letters to Secretary Sebelius as the Oversight Subcommittee Chairman on Ways and Means for her legal authority to make this change. Subsequently, she, and I think rightfully, suspended the program. But this does not correct bad law, a bad statute written into law. And unless we repeal class, the Department of Health and Human Services will be in violation of the law when it misses an important deadline for implementation in October of 2012 and again in 2014. The administration, I think, rightfully doesn't want to break the law, but we need to go further and repeal this. Otherwise, they are in violation of the law. And this is not my opinion. This is the opinion of CRS lawyers. So the first lesson, don't ignore reality. Second, don't break the law. And third, let's not compound our nation's long-term fiscal problems. A prominent Democrat and former Congressional Budget Office Director, Alice Rivlin, wrote, and I quote, "Since the class program is a new, unfunded entitlement, it should be repealed because it will increase the deficit over the long term," end quote. Pretty clear statement from a Democrat and former Congressional Budget Office Director. The President's own Deficit Commission agrees with this assessment, and our grandchildren simply cannot afford a new budget-busting entitlement when we already have entitlements that we're struggling with. We need to solve problems. We need to get our budget under control. We need to solve this problem of long-term care, and there are ways to do it. There are many ways to do it. I'm working on legislation. I've got it in draft form. I'm sharing it with fellow colleagues, Democrats and Republicans on the House Ways and Means Committee. I believe firmly that we have to do the right thing here. And I urge my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to support this rule. Let's repeal the class program, support H.R. 1173, and this will give us impetus to move forward on sensible legislation that will actually solve this problem and not add to the deficit. I believe beyond class repeal, we should make it easier for disabled Americans to save for their future needs. We can expand access to affordable private long-term care coverage. We can better educate Americans on the need for retirement planning, and there are ways to do this. There are a lot of good ideas on both sides of the aisle. I've already had conversations with Democrats on our committee. Let's solve a problem. Let's not add to the deficit. Let's not put the administration, by its own admission, and by the analysis of CRS attorneys, let's not put them in a position of actually breaking the law. That's not a good example to set for the American public. And I yield back.
The gentleman from Louisiana yields back. The gentleman from Texas reserves his time. The gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, let me yield myself such time as I may consume.
Gentleman's recognized.
First of all, I just want to point out to my colleagues, in case they may have forgotten, that the Class Act was actually debated in the Energy and Commerce Committee. And you want to know what the vote was? Passed by voice vote. I mean, there were a lot of other provisions of this health care bill that did not pass by voice vote, where my Republican friends insisted on an up or down vote, but on this one, it passed by a voice vote. So I want to point that out just so there's no misunderstanding. The other thing, I also think it's important, so there's no misunderstanding that somehow that nothing in the Affordable Health Care Act has kicked in, that a lot has kicked in already. Blood pressure screenings for adults age 18 and older, every 2 years for those with normal readings and annually for those with elevated results. Cervical cancer screenings, child services, including screenings for autism, cholesterol screenings, colorectal cancer screenings, diabetes screenings, diet counseling, evaluations for depression, immunizations, mammograms, all aimed at encouraging people to get preventative care so that they can avoid some of the debilitating results from not being checked. Those are all being covered under the Affordable Care Act. And my colleagues, over a year ago, it's now January 31st, well over a year ago, you brought up on this floor, under a closed rule, a bill to repeal the Affordable Health Care Act. And you said, oh, well, we get some ideas of how to fix the health care challenges in this country. It's been a year. Nothing. What have we been doing here? Well, we had a very vigorous debate on National Public Radio, something that I'm sure everybody is concerned about all across this country. We had a bill brought to the floor on reaffirming the national motto of this country, "In God We Trust." There it is, "In God We Trust," in gold letters right above where the Speaker sits. It's on the dollar bill. I didn't know it needed reaffirming, but we had to come to the floor and have this debate and vote on reaffirming our national motto. We had votes on every hot button issue that you can imagine. But when it comes to things like health care, improving the quality of life for people, we can't find the time. And so my friends say they have all these great ideas. It's been over a year since you voted to repeal the Affordable Health Care Act. Do you want to repeal all these, all these new services that are covered, all these tests, to help people stay well, and in staying well, controlling health care costs? My grandmother used to say, "An ounce of prevention keeps the doctor away." She was right. There's wisdom in encouraging people to seek out preventative care services. And if we can provide those services without a cost to encourage more people to take advantage of them, then more people can stay well. We will control health care costs in this country. We're having a discussion as a result of the Affordable Care Act about results-oriented health care. How do we keep our populations better? Not just how we can have the best doctors to do, heart surgeries and brain surgeries and all these very complex surgical procedures, which we want to make sure we still have the very best in the world. But maybe there are people who can avoid getting to that point. And already, because of the passage of this bill, more and more people are taking advantage of these screenings. That's a good thing, And my colleagues, every one of them on the other side of the aisle, voted to repeal outright all these things. All these things would have gone away. Senior citizens would be paying more on prescription drugs today if their repeal bill made it through this process. So, I mean, there are some good things that are happening. I know it's tough to ever concede that this president has done anything good, but on this, the Democratic Congress, with no help from my Republicans on the other side of the aisle in this House, and the President of the United States, actually, I think, took a step in the right direction. And as time goes on, more and more people are appreciating what is covered in that legislation. So I point that out because my friends on the other side have a tendency to say no to everything. It's very easy to say no. You don't have to take responsibility for anything. You said no over a year ago when you voted to repeal the Affordable Health Care Act, and you've said yes to nothing since. Today you're asking us to join you in saying no again to the issue of making sure that people have the ability to take care of their loved ones and themselves in the case where they need long-term care. You're saying, say no to that. And replace it with what? Oh, trust us, we'll get back to you. Don't worry about it. We know what we're doing here. Well, again, it's very easy to say no. It's more difficult to say yes, and you've said yes on nothing when it comes to positive improvements in our health care system. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to yield 3 minutes to the gentlewoman from Texas, Ms. Jackson-Lee.
The gentlewoman from Texas, Ms. Jackson-Lee, is recognized for 3 minutes.
Ask unanimous consent to revise and extend.
Without objection.
Let me thank the gentleman from Massachusetts. Let me thank my colleague from Texas. This is a very important debate. It brings about a lot of emotion for two reasons for me. In that same year of our debate on Affordable Care Act, I lost my mother, and she was in need of long-term care. As I speak, there are two elderly senior citizen relatives who likewise are in the midst of long-term care. They're of a different era, did not have the opportunity to plan as much because of their economics, because of their station in life for their later life. But as I've watched the intensity of the care, I realize that we cannot make health care a political football. I remember distinctly that very emotional time in March of 2010. My recollection serves me, not one friend on the other side of the aisle, not one Republican in this House, voted to help save the lives of Americans, provide them with a safety net of health care. My good friend from Massachusetts has already given a litany of provisions that are already saving lives, from the 26-year-old being on insurance to not being kicked out of the hospital, and many others. But let us focus on long-term care, a very personal part of one's life. 21 million people in 2008 had a condition that caused them to need help with their health and personal care. Many of them may be young people who've had serious, catastrophic illnesses and or accidents. Medicare does not cover long-term services and supports about 70% of people over 65. But the real point that I want to make is, if you want to talk about money, let me tell you how many of the family caregivers, or how much their kind of help is equated. Some $450 billion comes out of the family's either personal care or resources. This is not a throwaway. This is not throwing money away. And we recognize that the administration has thoughtfully said it needs to look at this long-term care in order to do it right. So I agree with the gentleman from Massachusetts that this should not be a throwaway, this should be a fix-up. And one of the amendments that I had suggested was the idea of letting the Secretary come forward with best practices. For no one can intrude into the most personal time of your life, when you're desperately in need, when you're catastrophically ill, or when you have aged to the point that there are people who you need to do the most personal things in life, in essence, to clean you up because of personal hygiene. Long-term care is needed by...
The gentlelady, additional 1 minute.
Long-term care, I thank the gentleman. Long-term care is needed by a projected 15 million people. As I indicated, chronic condition, trauma, or illness brings you to this, but the real idea is personal hygiene, getting dressed, using the bathroom. Do you want to put in the sunset of life, or in time of great desperation, the idea that no one is thinking about how we can best do long-term care? This repeal turns the light out, closes the door, abandons those family caregivers who are already given $450 billion of their time, their heart, the devastation. Medicaid giving $101 million, but personal is $14 billion. Mr. Speaker, let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater. Let us not, if you will, pass this bill that denies that America has a heart in the most difficult times of Americans. Who would raise their hand and say, I want someone to help me in my personal hygiene. I need someone to help me get to the bathroom, or something even more. This is what we're talking about. This is not the way to do it, Mr. Speaker. I demand that we vote against the Class Act repeal. I yield back.
Gentleman from Massachusetts reserves. The gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You know, Mr. Speaker, the beautiful part of this body and really the historical context of the United States Congress is that people can come down and advocate for things that they see, things that they want. We go through, have hearings, we pass bills. We're not here today to say what's good or bad or right or wrong in terms of how we help people. We're here saying the government cannot make this program work. To make the program work means that it has to have the underpinnings of an understanding, not just how it will work and who will pay for it, but really what are the services that are going to be provided. The gentlewoman from Texas was very genuine in talking about the needs of people. I deeply believe in those needs also. But it also goes back to this administration is the one that is walking away from the legislation. And it does us no good to try and act like it's okay, we'll just ignore that. The Congressional Budget Office today released its viewpoint for the coming year, and once again, this administration, President Obama, will have a $1 trillion deficit on his hands. The prior record before President Obama had been $459 billion. We are going to be $1 trillion again in the hole. At some point, someone needs to recognize we cannot sustain all these great and wonderful ideas, because if you cannot pay for something, you have set an expectation of performance that will not ever come true. That is cruel. That is cruel. And that is exactly what this Obamacare bill and this Class Act is all about. It is about substantially telling the American people that something will be there when it never will be there, because it's not put together where it's sustainable. The President's own people are saying it's not sustainable, and we as members of Congress are trying to work with the administration on how it might work, and they're saying it can't and won't. So the reality base of this is that the Republican Party does recognize the need. I recognize the need personally. I think Charles Boustany, Dr. Boustany, who is the sponsor of the bill, recognizes a need. But the way that it is defined and was defined in the Energy and Commerce Committee was it's a concept and an idea. Let's voice vote this or agree that we'll get something back later. The bill was not voice voted. The agreement that they would come back later and look at it was. In fact, Republicans are not guilty as charged. We are people who primarily go back home every weekend. I've never spent a weekend in Washington, D.C. in the 16 years I've been a member of Congress. I go back out of Washington and try and go home to listen to people about the concerns that they have. It doesn't take much of a person who goes back every weekend to recognize there are great needs in this country. But to try and put together a program that cannot sustain itself, that offers a false hope and cannot be met, is cruel. So today, Republicans, without calling anything bad, we're simply saying it cannot be sustained. It cannot be sustained by the government. The government cannot figure out a way for it to make it work. The managers of the business cannot figure out a way. So, we've heard today we should have and hold hearings. We should. We should take up this issue. Dr. Bustani talked about the need to do that, and we're going to. But the way the law looks right now, it's unsustainable, and we should tell the truth about that. And that is what Republicans are on the floor of the House doing today. I reserve my time.
The gentleman from Texas reserves his time. The gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield myself as much time as I may consume. First of all, I think it's important to make it clear that there was a voice vote in the Energy and Commerce Committee. There was 2 days of debate on this Class Act. 2 days of debate, and the amendment and the language in the amendment apparently was even changed before there was a voice vote. So to somehow diminish that there was even there was some sort of a a real vote or not, there was a real vote. 2 days of debate and a real vote. Secondly, just so there's no misunderstanding, my friends keep talking about this, the debt and the deficit we face. First of all, as a Democrat, I want to say that I don't need a lecture from my friends on the other side of the aisle about deficits and the debt. We saw how this country went from surplus to deficit with the passage of the Bush tax cuts, mostly for the wealthy that weren't paid for. Every economist tells you that they will affirm that they brought us into debt. Two, the prescription drug bill that was much more expensive than my friends on the other side of the aisle told us was going to be, and then they didn't pay for it on top of it. And then add to that 2 wars that aren't paid for. We're fighting the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, and we didn't pay for it. We didn't look for offsets in the budget. They didn't even go to the American people and say, we're at war, we have to have a war tax, or we have to find a way to pay for the war. No. Soldiers go fight, their families suffer, and we do nothing. So you want to know why we're in debt? That's why we're in debt. And just for the record, this Class Act, what we're talking about, is not this taxpayer-subsidized, endless, government funding type of a program here. I mean, it has to be self-financed by the premiums that people pay who volunteer to get into it. It says in the law, that this cannot be funded by the dollars of taxpayers. What this is a framework to get us to focus on the issue that we need to address, which is long-term health care in this country. Now, I'm from Massachusetts, and I may be a little sensitive on this issue because one of my heroes, the late Senator Ted Kennedy, championed this issue because he understood that there was a need out there, and he saw, as we all have seen, what families go through when loved ones can't afford or families can't afford to pay for the long-term care of loved ones. So it took us decades to get here, to get to this point where we have a framework. Yes, it is true, this is not perfect. It needs more work. But we have a framework here. And it's not a framework which calls for endless subsidies by the taxpayers. It says we've got to come up with a program that can self-sustain itself, that is financed by those who want to be enrolled in it. Why would you throw this away? Why would you throw this away? My friend on the other side of the aisle talks about false promises. Please, give me a break. False promises. You got up over a year ago and said we're repealing this health care reform bill, the Affordable Health Care Act, and we're going to replace it with something. It's been over a year. Nothing. Nothing. Not a single thing. It's not like we haven't had time to do it or to talk about these issues or debate these issues. I mean, this has become a place where trivial issues get debated passionately and important ones not at all. National public funding, national public radio funding. We have to debate that on the floor. Reaffirming our national motto, "In God We Trust." We get time for that. Issues on abortion and every hot-button issue you can think of, including we had a debate on making it easier for unsafe people to bring concealed weapons from state to state to state. Now, I don't know about Texas or about other countries, but I got to tell you, people talk to me about a lot of problems and about a lot of things that keep them up at night, some of the things that you've brought to this House floor, they don't even, it never even enters their mind. Because what keeps them up at night are things like this. What happens if I get sick? Will I be able to take care of myself? You know, what happens if my spouse gets sick? You know, seriously ill, will I be able to care for her? Will I be able to care for him? What if it's my child? What if it's my mother? What if it's my father? Will I be able to take care of them? Over a long period of time. Those are real-life issues that real people worry about each and every day. And so I would say to my friends on the other side of the aisle, I mean, first of all, vote down this rule because I think it is insulting to bring a rule to the floor on the issue of long-term care and say we're going to cap debate at 3 hours. I think that this is too important. This is more important than reaffirming our national motto, number one. Number two, I would urge my colleagues on this side of the aisle, understand that, you know, what this represents is a framework. And understand how long it has taken us to get to this point, and I got to tell you, if we throw this away, we throw this framework away, I doubt very much that any time in the near future that this Congress is going to do anything meaningful on the issue of long-term health care. And so let's get serious about dealing with the real challenges that the American people are faced with. Let's not say that that this is going to add to the deficit. It's not going to add to the deficit. This is and the law, it has to be self-sustaining. If not, it doesn't work. It says that we're not going to be subsidizing this program. That's what it says. So this is not about any. You want to get serious about the deficit? You know what? Then make sure Warren Buffett pays the same tax rate as his secretary. That's want to get serious about the deficit. That's what you can do to help us deal with the issue of the deficit. But going after this, with all these smoke screens, I think is unfortunate. So I'd urge my colleagues vote no on the rule and vote no on the underlying resolution, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Massachusetts yields back his time. The gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I think what we've done today is fair and honorable. We've talked about a problem. We've talked about a potential answer. First of all, the answer is that since we do not have a workable program, we ought to bring it back to the Congress. We ought to work with the administration. But I think we've been responsible to hear feedback from the administration in a hearing that said we can't make that program work. We cannot make that program work, and so I think that what we're doing today is to do the fiscally responsible thing and to end a program that is not going to work and was not designed to work, and then start back over if we choose to and put it into a workable mode. But only to have a false hope out there of something that cannot be sustained and something that the managers of the government cannot make work is a bad idea. We've got another $1 trillion deficit that is facing this country, another $1 trillion. We know who that is. That's pinned the tail on the donkey, Mr. Speaker. They are the ones responsible. They are the ones that are happy with that, and they are the ones that try and justify that. But I think that today we're coming together to find a solution to a long hair issue in this country by talking about it and doing something that cannot be sustained, and then admitting, as Mr. Boustany did, that we need to do something better and should not throw the idea today. But today we're going to vote on something that will do no further harm. I applaud my colleague, Congressman Boustany, for introducing the bill. I appreciate him coming before us. I respect and appreciate my committee, the Rules Committee, the gentleman, Mr. Dreyer, for bringing this debate here in such an open and transparent process. I encourage a yes vote on the rule, and I move the previous question on the resolution.
Without objection, the previous question is ordered. The question on adoption of the resolution, all of those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. The ayes have it.
Speaker,
gentleman from Massachusetts.
I ask for the yeas and nays.
The yeas and nays are requested. Those favoring a vote by the yeas and nays will rise. A sufficient number having risen, the yeas and nays are ordered. Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, Further proceedings on this question will be postponed. Pursuant to Clause 12A of Rule 1, the Chair declares the House in recess for a period of less than 15 minutes.
The House has finished debate on the rule